she had always been the quiet one. Even in a room full of people, she seemed to blend into the background, unnoticed and underestimated. Her life was not filled with drama or excitement. She worked hard, kept her head down, and focused on small joys that no one else seemed to notice. Music had always been her refuge. From the time she could remember, she had felt a deep connection to sound, to melody, to the way notes could express what words never could. In her small apartment, she had a piano that was slightly worn, its keys a little uneven, but it was hers. Every evening, after the day was done and the world had quieted, she would sit down and let her fingers wander across the keys. Her talent was something she had kept to herself, not out of arrogance, but because life had taught her to be cautious. People often judged quickly, and the kind of music she played was not flashy or showy. It was honest, emotional, and sometimes painful. She played what she felt rather than what was expected. And in a world that often favored loudness and attention, she had learned to remain silent. The small glances of admiration she sometimes caught from neighbors or coworkers were fleeting, and she never sought them out. She found her own satisfaction in the way a melody could linger in the air, in the shiver of a chord that felt like it understood her. She had friends. A few who knew her well enough to understand her shy humor and quiet strength. But even with them, music was something she kept mostly to herself. It was a private conversation between her and the world. She had tried to share it before, timidly at family gatherings or small parties. But the reactions were usually polite smiles or distracted glances. Some people whispered that she was good, but not in a way that encouraged her to step forward. It was enough for her, though, to know that music could be her voice when she didn't have the courage to speak. Her daily life was ordinary. She worked at a small office, surrounded by people who were kind but busy with their own routines. The conversations at work rarely touched anything deep. Most people were content with small talk, the weather, weekend plans. She often felt like an observer in someone else's story, watching but not participating fully. Still, she was patient and dependable, the kind of person others could rely on without even thinking. There was a quiet strength in her, steadiness that made people trust her without question. One evening, after a long day filled with meetings and paperwork, she returned home to her apartment. She set down her bag, loosened her shoes, and went straight to the piano. She pressed a key, then another, letting the sound fill the room. At first, it was just a simple scale, familiar and comforting. Then she began to play a melody she had been working on for weeks, one that carried a mixture of hope and longing. The notes intertwined, creating patterns that were both delicate and powerful. She closed her eyes, letting the music guide her hands. The outside world faded, and for a while, it felt like only the piano in her existed. Music had always been her way of understanding herself. When words failed, the piano spoke. When she felt lonely, frustrated, or unsure, she would pour her emotions into the keys. Each note was a fragment of her inner life, a piece of truth she could not share aloud. Over time, she had developed a routine, a rhythm to her solitude. The piano was not just an instrument. It was a companion, a mirror, and a teacher. She learned patience through it, discipline, and the subtle art of listening. Though she rarely performed for others, she did watch videos online. Seeing how musicians could captivate an audience with their skill and passion, she admired them silently, sometimes imagining what it would be like to play for a crowd that truly listened. But those were just fleeting thoughts, quickly set aside. She was content with her private performances, her own audience of empty chairs and quiet walls. Her life, despite being quiet, was not without challenges. She had experienced disappointment, small heartbreaks, and moments of self-doubt. There were days when she questioned whether she was wasting her time, whether her music meant anything at all. But every evening when she returned to the piano, the doubts faded. The music reminded her that her feelings mattered, that her voice had weight, even if it was never heard by anyone else. This was her truth, her proof that she existed beyond the ordinary routines of life. Sometimes she would imagine sharing her music, just a little, with someone who might understand. She pictured a small gathering, a few attentive faces, the way a melody could create a connection without a single word. But those thoughts remained fantasies, delicate and fragile, because the world outside had always seemed too busy to pause and listen. She had learned to protect herself, to keep her talent hidden until she felt the right moment. On this particular evening, she played. There was an unusual sense of calm in her apartment. The sun had set, leaving a soft twilight that filtered through the windows. She let her fingers move freely, improvising, exploring new harmonies she hadn't tried before. The sound was richer, deeper, more expressive than usual. She paused occasionally, listening to the resonance, noticing the way the vibrations seemed to settle around her. It was a moment of pure presence, where nothing else existed but her and the music. It was during these evenings that she felt most alive. She could be vulnerable, honest, and completely herself without fear of judgment. The piano absorbed everything: her hopes, her fears, her regrets, her dreams. It held her truth in a way that no one else could. And in this quiet intimacy, she found strength. It was a paradox she had come to accept. In hiding her talent from the world, she had discovered its deepest power, though her life appeared simple to outsiders. Every note she played was a small rebellion against the constraints of normalcy. She did not perform for applause or recognition. She performed for clarity, for understanding, for the affirmation that her inner life was valid. Each melody was a declaration of her existence, a way to claim space in a world that often overlooked quiet people, even as she wrapped up her practice. There was a lingering sense of anticipation. Something in her felt different that evening, a subtle awareness that perhaps the world might one day hear her. It was not a demand or a hope, just a quiet acknowledgement that her music could reach beyond the walls of her apartment. She did not know when or how, but the thought was comforting. Like the first hint of dawn after a long night, as she turned off the piano light and prepared for bed, she carried with her the sense of fulfillment that only music could give. It was a satisfaction that did not require validation from anyone else. She knew her own worth, her own capacity to create something meaningful, and that was enough. The quiet girl in the background had found her voice, even if it had only been heard by the empty room. And deep down, she believed that one day the world would listen, and her music would tell a story that words never could. The next day, she went about her usual routine, carrying out her work with quiet efficiency. Nothing about the day suggested that it would be different from any other. She answered emails, organized files, and helped colleagues when needed. The office was alive with chatter, laughter, and the occasional tension of deadlines, but she moved through it as always, quietly observing, never the center of attention. Yet deep inside, she felt a faint sense of anticipation. Though she could not explain why, it was during lunch break that it happened. A few coworkers had gathered for a casual get-together in a nearby cafe. The mood was light, filled with jokes and laughter. Someone, half joking, half curious, said, "You should play something for us sometime. We know you have that piano at home, right?" It was meant as a playful suggestion, a passing comment that would soon be forgotten. But when they said it, everyone turned and looked at her, the eyes carrying both expectation and amusement. She felt a sudden flutter of nerves in her stomach. She smiled politely, trying to keep the situation light. "I don't know. I usually just play at home," she replied softly. Her words were meant to deflect, to make it clear that she wasn't serious about performing. Most people would have laughed, taken the joke, and moved on. But there was something different this time. A small part of her felt a spark of curiosity, a tiny seed of possibility that had never been there before. She thought of her piano, the way her fingers moved over the keys, the comfort and clarity it brought her. Could she share that with others? The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Her coworkers continued to tease, some nudging her, saying it would be fun, a little entertainment for everyone. "Come on, just play a little for laughs," one said. The words echoed in her mind. It was meant as a joke, but she heard them differently. Maybe it was an invitation not just for fun, but for something more. Maybe it was the chance to step out of the shadows even just a little. She felt her heart beat faster at the thought. That evening, she went home and sat in front of her piano. The memory of the comment lingered in her mind, stirring emotions she hadn't fully realized. She was nervous, unsure whether she should even consider it. Sharing her music was always a private act, a dialogue with herself. Could she let strangers into that world? Could she trust them with something so personal? The questions made her hands tremble slightly as she lifted them over the keys. She began with simple scales, testing the familiar sounds. Slowly, she moved into a melody she had been practicing, one that carried a mix of melancholy and hope. The notes filled the room, soft at first, then more confident as she allowed herself to sink into the music. Her initial nervousness began to fade, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. She realized that music was not about pleasing others. It was about truth, about honesty, about expressing what could not be said with words alone as she played. She imagined the faces of her coworkers, the casual gathering at the cafe, the light teasing that had prompted this moment. She didn't play to impress them. She played to communicate, to share a part of herself that had been hidden for so long. Each note was deliberate, thoughtful, and full of emotion. She could feel the story of her life weaving itself into the music, the years of quiet observation, the moments of solitude, the unspoken dreams. For the first time, she thought seriously about the possibility of performing in front of an audience, even a small one. The thought was frightening, but it also excited her. She imagined the reactions, not the applause or the praise, but the way people might feel something real, something honest, when they heard her play. That possibility made her hands move more freely, more confidently, as if the piano itself understood the importance of the moment. Over the next few days, she continued to practice, refining the melodies she might share. She experimented with emotions, dynamics, and pauses, learning how to make the music speak without words. Each evening, the music became more than just practice. It was preparation, a quiet readiness for a moment that had not yet arrived but was slowly approaching. She felt a sense of anticipation building, a mixture of fear and excitement that was unlike anything she had experienced before. Meanwhile, her coworkers continued to joke about the idea. "When are you going to play for us?" they would ask, not knowing that she was already preparing herself for that day. Their teasing was lighthearted, but it had awakened something inside her. She realized that this casual request, meant as a joke, had sparked a desire to share her music in a way she had never considered before. It was strange how a simple comment could open a door she had kept closed for so long. As the day of the gathering approached, she felt a growing tension inside her. She questioned herself constantly. Would she be able to convey the depth of her music to people who were only expecting a little entertainment? Would they understand? Or would it be dismissed as nothing more than a brief distraction? These questions haunted her, but she did not let them stop her. She practiced with determination, reminding herself that the purpose was not approval, but honesty. The night of the gathering arrived. She felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement. She dressed simply, choosing clothes that were comfortable but presentable. She arrived at the cafe, her heart racing, and was greeted with warm smiles and laughter. The atmosphere was casual, filled with conversation and clinking cups. She could have joined in and kept her music to herself, blending into the background as she always had. But something inside her told her that this was the moment to step forward. When the conversation lulled, someone gestured toward her and said, half in jest, "Well, are you going to play or not?" All eyes turned to her, and for a brief moment, the room was silent. The weight of the moment pressed on her chest. But she remembered the evenings at her piano, the hours of private practice, the melodies that carried her truths. She took a deep breath, walked to the piano, and sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly, but she focused on the music, not the audience. She began with a soft, tentative melody, just enough to fill the initial silence. Slowly, her confidence grew, and the music became richer, more expressive. She was no longer playing for fun, no longer simply responding to a casual request. She was playing for truth, for honesty, for the story that had lived inside her for so long. Each note was deliberate, carrying emotion and depth that words could never capture. The room, initially filled with casual chatter, began to quiet as people turned their attention to her. By the time she finished the first piece, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The casual laughter had faded, replaced by attentive silence. People were leaning forward slightly, eyes focused on her hands and the piano keys, ears tuned to every sound. She realized that music had the power to transform the room, to command attention without a single word, to create connection through honesty. It was a revelation she had never experienced outside of her private practice. As she prepared to start the next piece, she felt a surge of determination. She would not play to meet expectations or for polite approval. She would play to express, to communicate, to share the truth that had lived quietly inside her for so long. And as she continued, she felt a new sense of freedom. A liberation from the self-doubt that had kept her silent for so many years. The music was no longer a private refuge. It was a bridge between her inner world and the audience before her. The rest of the evening unfolded with a sense of wonder. She played several pieces, each different in tone and emotion, each revealing a layer of her story. The audience listened in rapt attention, moved in ways she had only imagined in her private moments. Some eyes glistened, others were wide with surprise, but all were captivated. It was a quiet transformation, subtle but undeniable. The casual gathering had become something more a shared experience, a moment of connection, a glimpse into a life lived with depth and feeling. When she finally paused, the room was still. There was no immediate applause, no loud cheer. Instead, there was a silence that felt profound, as if everyone had been touched by something real and essential. She smiled softly, realizing that this moment was about more than recognition. It was about truth, about sharing a part of herself that had remained hidden for too long. And in that realization, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known, a quiet joy that no casual comment or passing glance could ever provide. That night, she returned home, her heart full, her mind alive with the memory of the audience's stillness, the way the music had moved through the room. She understood that the casual invitation, the light-hearted suggestion to play for fun, had become a turning point. She had played for truth, and in doing so had changed the room and, in some small way, herself. The seed of possibility had grown into something real, a first step into a new chapter where her music would no longer be hidden in the shadows, but shared with a world ready to listen. As she settled into the piano, the room seemed to shift around her. At first, the casual chatter of the gathering continued, a low hum of conversation and laughter. But the moment her fingers touched the keys, something subtle began to change. The notes were soft at first, tentative, almost like a whisper. But as she continued, her confidence grew, and the sound became more deliberate, more expressive. Each chord, each melody seemed to draw the room in, as if the music itself demanded attention. People who had been talking quietly suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Conversations faded into silence without anyone noticing. Eyes turned toward her, not with judgment or expectation, but with curiosity and interest. The energy in the room changed, like a current shifting direction. It was not just that she was playing well. It was that the music carried emotion, something genuine and raw, that people could feel even if they could not name it. Her fingers danced across the keys with ease and precision. But more than that, there was soul in her playing, a truth that could not be manufactured. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the music fully. Memories surfaced, fragments of past joy and sorrow, moments she had lived quietly and privately. The piano became an extension of herself, speaking the words she could not say aloud. With each note, she poured out feelings she had kept hidden, not seeking attention or approval, but simply expressing what had been inside her for so long. She felt a sense of release, as if the music itself was lifting a weight from her shoulders. Around her, the audience was captivated. Some leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on her hands and the piano, as if trying to follow the invisible thread that connected her emotions to the sound. Others sat back, still letting the music wash over them. There were no distractions, no interruptions. For the first time, she realized that people were listening not out of politeness, but because they were genuinely drawn to the honesty in her performance. It was a rare and powerful moment, one that made her heart swell with a mixture of humility and exhilaration. She transitioned from one piece to another, each different in tone and emotion. Some were soft and introspective, others bold and stirring. The shifts in dynamics, the pauses, the crescendos all were carefully chosen, instinctive yet deliberate. She could feel the room responding, the subtle shifts in posture, the quiet inhalations. The glances exchanged between people who suddenly seemed aware of the emotional landscape she was creating. It was as if the music had become a language everyone understood, speaking directly to the heart without the need for words. As the pieces continued, she began to notice small reactions that touched her deeply. A person at the back, usually chatty, had gone completely still, eyes closed, letting the music reach them fully. Someone else had tears welling in their eyes, a quiet response to the vulnerability she had poured into the piano. Even those who initially seemed skeptical or disinterested were drawn in, their attention captured by something authentic and undeniable. She realized that her playing was not just entertainment, it was connection. Each note built a bridge between herself and the listeners, a bridge made of honesty and emotion. The more she played, the more she lost herself in the moment. Time seemed to stretch and fold around her. Minutes passed like hours, yet there was no sense of hurry or urgency. Her fingers moved naturally, guided by instinct and feeling rather than conscious thought. The music flowed through her, a continuous stream of expression that seemed to speak to everyone differently, yet perfectly. Each person in the room felt something personal, something that resonated with their own experiences. Though they might not have known why, she experimented with tempo and rhythm, adding subtle variations that made each piece unique. There was a soft, lingering note here, a sudden, sharp chord there, all intended to evoke emotion rather than impress. She noticed how the room responded to the shifts, the collective intake of breath, the stilling of restless movements, the way people's gazes softened or widened. It was a dialogue without words, an exchange of feelings that was profoundly human. She understood then that music had a power that was both gentle and commanding, capable of altering the atmosphere of a space without a single spoken sentence. At one point, she paused in the middle of a piece, letting the last chord resonate fully. The silence that followed was not empty. It was alive with attention, with the weight of what had been played. She looked up, and for the first time she met the eyes of her audience. There was no judgment, no expectation, just presence and recognition. People were seeing her, truly seeing her, not as the quiet girl in the background, but as someone who carried depth, talent, and authenticity. It was a humbling and exhilarating moment, one that she would remember for the rest of her life. She began the next piece, her hands flowing more confidently across the keys. This time, she allowed herself to take risks, to explore emotions she had never expressed before. The melody rose and fell like the tides, at times delicate and tender, at others strong and commanding. She felt a sense of freedom she had never known, the freedom that comes from expressing truth without fear. The audience responded subtly but unmistakably, leaning into the music, their expressions shifting as if they were traveling alongside her. On an emotional journey, there were moments when she glanced up briefly, seeing the faces around her soften, some reflecting memories, some reflecting admiration, some simply absorbed in the beauty of the sound. She realized that the music had become more than just a personal expression, it had become a shared experience. Each note was a thread connecting everyone in the room, a silent understanding that transcended conversation. She had played for herself, but in doing so, she had touched others in ways she could not have anticipated. She moved into the final piece of the set, a composition that was personal, full of nuance and layered emotion. It was a culmination of everything she had been feeling, her fears, her hopes, her longings, her gratitude for the small joys in life. The melody was not complex in a technical sense, but it carried a depth that spoke to the heart. She felt herself trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from the intensity of the connection she was forging with the room. It was as if every note carried a piece of her soul, reaching out and meeting the souls of those listening. By the time she reached the last chord, the room was completely silent. There were no coughs, no shifting in chairs, no murmurs. It was a silence filled with attention, reflection, and emotion. She held the chord for a moment longer, savoring the resonance, then let it fade naturally. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the silence lingered, profound and heavy with meaning. She looked up again and saw eyes that were wide, some glistening with tears, others filled with awe and admiration. She realized that the music had done something extraordinary. It had moved people in ways that words could never achieve. For a few minutes, no one spoke. The room felt transformed, as if the air itself had shifted. The casual gathering had become a space of shared experience, a moment of connection that would linger long after the music had ended. She sat quietly, letting the energy settle, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and humility. She had stepped forward, played her truth, and in doing so, had changed the room without even trying. It was a revelation, a confirmation of something she had always known deep down, that music, when played honestly, could touch hearts and minds in ways nothing else could. Finally, someone broke the silence with a soft clap, followed by another, until the room slowly filled with quiet applause. It was not loud or boisterous, but genuine, heartfelt. She smiled, feeling warmth spread through her. The moment was not about praise. It was about acknowledgement, about being seen and heard. And in that acknowledgement, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before. The quiet girl in the background had finally stepped into the light. It's not for recognition, but for truth, as she left the piano and returned to her seat. The energy in the room had shifted completely. People were talking again, but it was different now. There was a new respect, a deeper attention, a sense that something meaningful had just occurred. She listened to the conversations, noticing the subtle ways in which her music had sparked reflection, emotion, and connection. She realized then that playing for truth was more powerful than playing for applause, more transformative than playing for mere entertainment. It was a lesson she would carry with her always. A reminder that authenticity had the power to change not only a room, but also the person who dared to express it. As she left the piano and returned to her seat, she felt a strange mixture of relief and exhilaration. The room, once filled with casual chatter and light-hearted joking, now had a weight, a quiet intensity that she could feel in the air. People were still murmuring softly, exchanging glances, as if silently agreeing that something had changed. She watched them carefully, noticing the shift in posture, the expressions that carried newfound respect and wonder. It was a subtle but undeniable transformation. It's one that made her realize the power of what she had just shared. The evening continued, but it was no longer just a casual gathering. Conversations were slower, more thoughtful, as people processed what they had experienced. Some whispered about the music, others simply sat quietly, still absorbing the emotions it had stirred. She noticed a few faces that seemed reflective, as though memories or feelings long buried had been awakened by the melodies she had played. It was a reminder that music, when played with honesty, had the power to reach into the deepest parts of a person's heart. She felt a warmth spreading through her, a sense of validation that had nothing to do with applause or praise. It was the acknowledgement of truth, the recognition that she had shared something real, something meaningful. Her nerves from earlier had melted away, replaced by a quiet confidence. She realized that playing for truth, rather than for fun or approval, had created a connection that could not be measured by superficial reactions. It was something deeper, more enduring. One of the co-workers who had initially teased her approached, speaking softly. "I didn't know you could play like that," they admitted, eyes wide with admiration. "It was incredible. You made us all feel something." The words were simple, but they carried weight. They confirmed what she had sensed in the silence that followed her performance, that her music touched people in ways that words could not capture. She nodded humbly, feeling a sense of gratitude for the opportunity to share a part of herself. Throughout the rest of the evening, she noticed more subtle reactions. A person who had been quietly observing finally smiled, their eyes reflecting a deep appreciation. Someone else leaned forward slightly, clearly absorbed in thought. Even those who had been skeptical or distracted seemed to be carrying a new awareness, recognition of the depth of emotion she had conveyed. She realized that the room had changed not because she had sought to impress, but because she had been honest. And that honesty had been enough to transform the atmosphere. As the gathering drew to a close, She packed up her things slowly, taking in the room one last time. People were talking again, but the energy was different now. There was a sense of calm reflection, a subtle respect, a quiet admiration that lingered in the air. She noticed the way people interacted, more thoughtful, more present. It was as if the music had opened a door to something unspoken, a shared understanding that transcended casual conversation. She walked home that night with a sense of wonder. The streets were quiet, the lights casting soft reflections on the pavement. She thought about the evening, replaying the moments in her mind, the way the room had gone silent, the expressions on the faces around her, the subtle changes in energy that she had felt. She realized that her decision to play for truth rather than for fun had been a turning point. It was a moment that would remain with her, confirmation of the power of authenticity and honesty. In the days that followed, she noticed subtle changes in her life. People at work began to look at her differently, not just as a quiet, dependable coworker, but as someone with depth and talent. There were more questions about her music, more curiosity, and even offers to hear her play again. She felt a new sense of possibility opening up, a door that had been closed for so long now, slightly ajar. It was not about recognition or fame. It was about being seen and heard for who she truly was. She continued to practice at home, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The music was no longer just a private refuge. It was a bridge, a way to connect with others, to share emotions that could not be spoken. She experimented with new melodies, new rhythms, and new expressions, feeling more confident in her ability to communicate through sound. Each evening at the piano became a time of exploration, not just of technique, but of emotion, of storytelling, connection. She also found herself reflecting more deeply on the experience of sharing her music. She realized that the fear of judgment, the hesitation to step forward, had been holding her back for years. But once she had taken the step, once she had trusted herself to play honestly, she discovered a new strength. She understood that authenticity, vulnerability, and courage were more powerful than technical skill or polish. The music was not just about notes and rhythm. It was about truth. That truth had the power to change hearts. Friends and coworkers began to ask her about her experiences, curious about how she had prepared, how she had felt during the performance. She spoke honestly, sharing her process and the emotions that guided her. She realized that her story was as much a part of the music as the notes themselves. People listened, captivated not just by her skill, but by her honesty, by the journey that had led her to that moment. It was a reminder that sharing truth could inspire others, even in small ways. Over time, she found more opportunities to play, each experience reinforcing the lessons she had learned. She played for small gatherings, for friends, for strangers. And each time she approached the piano with the same intention, to convey truth and emotion, not to seek approval. The reactions varied, but the core remained the same. The music had the power to connect, to move, to transform. She felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond recognition. It was the joy of expression, the satisfaction of being honest, and the knowledge that her music had touched others. As the months passed, the memory of that first evening lingered with her. She remembered the way the room had shifted, the silence that had followed her first piece, the subtle changes in energy and attention. It was a reminder that sometimes small moments could have profound effects. She understood that her music had not just changed the room that night. It had changed her perception of herself and her place in the world. She was no longer just the quiet girl in the background. She was a musician, a storyteller, a bearer of truth. She continued to grow, both as a musician and as a person. Each time she sat at the piano, she felt a deep connection to her own emotions and to the potential for connection with others. She understood that the power of music lay not in its complexity or technicality, but in its honesty, its ability to speak to the human experience. She embraced this understanding fully, letting it guide her performances, her practice, and her interactions with others. Through all of this, she remained humble, aware that the journey was ongoing. There would always be new challenges, new moments of doubt, and new opportunities to step forward. but she carried with her the knowledge that playing for truth, rather than for entertainment or approval, was the key to meaningful expression. It was a lesson that would shape her life, her music, and her understanding of human connection for years to come. In the end, that evening, that casual invitation to play for fun had become so much more. It had been the catalyst for a profound transformation, not only in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. The room had changed because she had dared to share her truth, and in doing so, she discovered a power she had never known, the power to touch hearts, to inspire and to create connection through honesty and emotion. She knew that this was only the beginning, and that her music, her voice, and her courage would continue to shape the spaces and people she encountered in ways she could never fully anticipate. The days following that evening were filled with a quiet sense of change. She went about her routine, but everything seemed subtly different. At work, people treated her with a new awareness, not loud or obvious, but perceptible in gestures, glances, and the way they approached conversations. She no longer felt invisible. Her presence mattered, not because she had sought it, but because she had shared something true, something that could not be ignored. Music became central in her life in a new way. It was no longer just a private refuge or a way to pass the hours alone. It had become a language of connection, a bridge between her inner world and others. She found herself thinking about melodies even while working, imagining how they could touch people, make them pause, or feel something beyond the ordinary. Every note she played now had intention, a purpose beyond mere practice. Each evening at the piano was no longer just about self-expression. It was about reaching out, communicating, sharing the truth that had always lived inside her. One morning, a colleague approached her with an idea. "We're organizing a small event," they said. "It's nothing big, just a few people from different departments. We'd love for you to play." She felt her stomach tighten. This was not a casual comment or a light-hearted joke. It was a genuine invitation. Her heart raced as she considered the implications. Could she do it again? Could she share herself so openly with a new audience? But a small, steady voice inside her reminded her of that first night, of the quiet power that had come from playing for truth rather than approval. She nodded, accepting the opportunity. In preparation, she spent hours at her piano, exploring new compositions, refining old ones, and practicing the art of conveying emotion through sound. She paid attention not just to the technical aspects, but to the story behind each melody. She imagined the listeners, not as critics or strangers, but as people with hearts and experiences that could resonate with her music. She discovered new ways to express vulnerability and strength, hope and sorrow, simplicity and depth. The preparation was more than practice, it was a meditation, a way to immerse herself fully in the music and its potential impact. The day of the event arrived, and she felt a familiar mixture of nerves and anticipation. She dressed simply, with care, choosing clothing that felt comfortable yet presentable. As she walked into the room, she felt the subtle energy of expectation. But it was not heavy or oppressive. It was quiet curiosity, a willingness to engage. People greeted her warmly, and she noticed their eyes carried a new attentiveness. They had heard about her music, about the first night, and there was a sense of eagerness to experience it for themselves. As she sat at the piano, she took a deep breath, letting the moment settle around her. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and she allowed herself to focus entirely on the music, not the audience. She began with a gentle melody, soft and contemplative, letting the notes flow naturally. Gradually, the music grew, gaining depth and emotion. Each chord was chosen with intention, each pause deliberate. She could feel the room responding, the subtle shifts in posture, the quiet inhalations, the attentive gazes. It was the same power she had felt before, multiplied by the awareness and presence of this new audience as she continued. She explored a range of emotions: joy, sorrow, longing, and hope. She let the music carry her personal stories, the experiences that had shaped her, the quiet triumphs and defeats, the small moments of revelation that had defined her life. She played not to impress, not to seek applause, but to communicate, to share something authentic. The audience, sensing her honesty, responded in kind. Some closed their eyes, some leaned forward, some simply sat still, allowing the music to wash over them. It was a dialogue without words, connection forged through sound and feeling in the middle of her performance. She paused briefly, letting a single chord linger in the air. The silence was alive with attention, heavy with reflection. She opened her eyes and saw faces, transformed, curious, contemplative, moved. She realized that she was not just playing music. She was telling a story, weaving a tapestry of emotion that each listener could interpret in their own way. It was a shared experience, a moment of human connection that transcended language, judgment, and expectation. When she resumed, her playing grew more confident, more daring. She experimented with rhythm, dynamics, and phrasing, exploring the full range of her expression. She allowed herself to be vulnerable, to let the music reflect not just her skill, but her humanity. Each note carried meaning. Each passage was imbued with feeling. She could sense the impact on the room, the way people leaned in, the subtle nods, the soft smiles, the glistening eyes. She understood then that playing for truth had a power far beyond entertainment. It could touch the core of human experience. As the performance drew to a close, she transitioned into a final piece that was deeply personal. The melody rose and fell like the ebb and flow of life itself. She poured into it all the emotions she had held back, all the quiet thoughts and feelings that had remained private for years. The room was silent, fully absorbed, as if everyone was holding their breath in reverence. When she played the last chord, she let it resonate fully, savoring the sound, letting it linger. Then she lifted her hands and exhaled, feeling a profound sense of release. The silence after the final note was meaningful. No one clapped immediately, as though the moment itself needed to exist without interruption. It was a silence of reflection, of acknowledgement, of shared understanding. Slowly, applause began, soft at first, then growing, genuine, and heartfelt. She smiled quietly, feeling warmth spread through her. It was not the applause that mattered, but the acknowledgement of connection. The recognition that she had shared something essential, something real. After the event, people approached her, speaking with sincerity about how the music had affected them. Some described emotions they had not expected to feel. Others shared memories that her melodies had stirred. She listened, humbled and grateful, realizing that her music had become a vessel for empathy, reflection, and understanding. She understood that her decision to play honestly, to let her truth guide her performance, had created ripples far beyond her imagination. In the weeks and months that followed, she found more opportunities to share her music. Invitations came from small gatherings, community events, and friends who had witnessed the transformation firsthand. She continued to practice diligently, exploring new compositions and experimenting with expression. Each performance reinforced the lessons she had learned, that authenticity, vulnerability, and emotional honesty were more powerful than technical mastery alone, and that sharing one's truth could inspire, connect in ways that nothing else could. She also noticed changes within herself. She was more confident, more willing to step forward in situations that once intimidated her. She carried a quiet assurance, rooted in the knowledge that her voice mattered, that her music could touch lives. She approached each new opportunity with focus and intention, knowing that the act of sharing herself honestly was both a gift to others and a source of personal fulfillment. Her life continued to be shaped by these experiences. She found joy in the small moments of connection that her music facilitated, the smile of someone moved by a melody, the quiet nod of understanding, the reflective silence that followed a particularly emotional passage. She realized that the power of music was not in the recognition it brought, but in the ability to reach the hearts of others, to create moments of empathy, and to build bridges between people who might otherwise never understand each other. Over time, she became more open to other forms of expression, realizing that the courage to share one's truth could extend beyond music. She engaged more deeply in conversations, took small risks in her personal and professional life, and nurtured relationships with a newfound awareness of authenticity. The lessons learned from playing for truth, the courage to be vulnerable, the importance of honesty, The power of connection became guiding principles in every aspect of her life.